Since each individual elements and individual subarrays of an array can be treated as individual variables, that means that they can be modified. So a lot of times we have this idea of, we have two sides of the equal sign. We have the left-hand side and the right-hand side. The left-hand side identifies where we want to store things. The right-hand side identifies what we want to store there. And that's really the big principle behind this next video. So what we can do is on this side, we can identify individual locations that we want to modify, that we want to change. So if I have a vector of single values, I can say I want to change locations 1, 2, and 3. And I want to change them to values 4, 5, 6. So that means locations 1, 2, and 3 are going to get new values, 4, 5, 6. Same thing for a matrix. We can identify which rows and columns we want to change. Just keep in mind that the number of elements needs to be the same on both sides. So if I have 3 elements here, I need to identify 3 elements. The only caveat to this is if it's a single value. If I say all numbers should be equal to 5, it's going to replicate 5 into all of those locations. But in general, the number of elements needs to be the same on both sides. Must be the same. Another thing that's weird with MATLAB is we assume, or we can assume, that arrays go on to infinity. Not always, but we can assume they go on to infinity. That illustration doesn't always hold up. So any value that isn't created, isn't defined, is going to be initialized to 0 or assumed to be 0. So we could add new locations by identifying which new locations we want to add. So if I have an array that contains only 3 numbers, so if I have a vector that says 0, 1, 7, 9, 5, 2, I have locations 0 or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I only have 6 locations. If I wanted to add new locations, let's say I wanted to add locations 10, 11, and I want to set them both to 3. That means that MATLAB is going to put zeros, and then in locations 10 and 13, or 10 and 11, is going to add 3. It's a weird thing that MATLAB does. I don't recommend doing it, but you can do it that way. Same thing for matrices, for rows and columns. If you are adding rows or adding columns, then it must be an entire row or an entire column. Any unassigned elements will be set to 0. Like I said, you can do this. I don't recommend it. There are better ways, better programming methods to do this, even though MATLAB will allow you. We can also delete elements. So we can delete elements by just setting them equal to an empty bracket. So this essentially says, I want to delete these locations. I want them to be set to empty. When you set them to empty, they're automatically going to be deleted, taken out of the vector, taken out of the matrix. Keep in mind, when you delete matrices, delete elements from matrices, you can only delete rows or columns at a time. And there we go. But it's really based on this idea. Where do we want to store our values? Is it an entire variable? Is it part of a variable? Is it a single value inside that variable? Is it an entire row, an entire column? Is it a whole smattering of values? And what do we want to store there? The number of locations on both sides need to match. So if I have 4 locations here, it needs to be 4 locations here. The orientation also needs to match as well, and we'll go through lots of examples on that. But this is the main idea. Keep this in mind for this entire week.